All right, 6 o'clock. Go ahead and call today's meeting to order. First thing on the agenda is the master plan update.
Yep, so during the February 23rd study session, Councilmember Suzanis asked some questions or requested having this topic on the agenda, talk about the master plan update process, and propose some questions for Giffords-Webster. Unfortunately, Giffords-Webster had a conflict and they can't attend today, but Jill was able to provide written responses to the questions that were received over the past couple weeks. So those are in your packet, so we can discuss those. Additionally, working with Austin, tomorrow's Planning Commission agenda, there is a section dedicated for council remarks and council comments if you're able to make that meeting. So, what was yours?
You requested it, so I'll see if you had any questions or discussions on the responses.
Well, let me just, yeah, so I mean, first of all, they're not here to thank, but thank them for the depth of their answers, and I appreciate it. And I think, you know, the genesis of it was a little bit that I have been attending the sessions as they've gone, and without the context of their overall plan, which hasn't really been presented, I think this goes a decent ways to getting there, which gives us better understanding. I was only sort of being able to judge what I was seeing. So some of these questions got answered pretty well, in that there's going to be further consideration down the line. And you know, and I think we have a better understanding of the process. That said, I just had a few things that I noticed that I'd like to bring up with the council, but if anybody else wants to jump in, feel free, or start, or I don't need to start.
You can start, go ahead.
All right. Well, I wasn't going to go over the questions themselves, but just some observations from the answers, and maybe things that we want to consider as a council, and you can tell me what you think. First one was just that within their response, it seemed like they were anticipating council's first real interaction fallish, this coming fall. And I would just put out there, do we want to potentially engage, like tomorrow, for instance, we're going to have an engagement with them. Do we want to set up maybe a couple other touch points before you get that far? Because by that point, presumably, a lot of it will already be either yes or no versus what if we lean this way or that way, or if you thought about that. So that was one thought I had, and then just two other categories, really, two or three. This is a question for them that I can hold till tomorrow, but just to give you my thinking. So far, the questions have really been, do you support X, Y, or Z? And the way it's being presented now, you can support everything. But as we know, supporting everything isn't feasible, and it doesn't really give you actionable insight into what do people want. And so I'm hoping that they'll eventually get it to a point where we're looking at real trade-offs and saying which, if it meant less parking spaces, would we be in favor of X, or that type of
Some more prioritization.
Yeah, so that was just an observation from, again, witnessing what was happening and trying to understand it. I like their answer on pure cities. Again, from what I'd witnessed so far, they would say something about Southfield has all of this, and then the implied and sometimes explicit follow-up was, but we don't. And it's like, well, I just want a little more nuance about what are we comparing, because we're not every city. The other thing I thought was interesting in their answers, they acknowledge, we rely on some of the bigger cities around us for stuff. And when I think about housing in particular, I think, well, okay, so we're not big enough to have our own library, our own this or that, but we interact with Southfield so that we have a whole. I think housing has to look that way a little bit too. We can't have everything here in this tiny little town, but we need to be part of the overall solution. That's all. I just framing how they frame the comparisons. And again, that might be further down the road. I was just responding to sort of what we were seeing. The last one, this is maybe the biggest one for us, because they asked it outright, is I said, just because it seems like from both planning commission meetings, And then more so from the fact that, we voted against this latest study, et cetera. And then the discussions I've heard around it, it does feel like there's a directionally, we're leaning away from the boulevard solution. And if that's true, then we should signal that to Giffords Webster. And what they're saying is, well, no one signaled that to us, and that's fair. But I'm just suggesting that maybe we do want to signal that to them so that, and it doesn't even mean backing off entirely, but when we were talking about it, we were looking at a 15, 20-year timeline potentially to have that if we wanted it. And meanwhile, we're doing 5-year, 10-year master plans where it won't happen, and yet we're sort of still in the back of our head saying, So I know where I stand on it, but I thought we could discuss on the council if we want to signal to them to maybe take that supposition out of the master planning that they do.
So I have a question. So because I know I never said I was against the Southfield Boulevard. I thought what we voted against was to make that decision that quickly. So that's why I'm a little need more explanation on what you need to move the planning commission away from the boulevard.
I didn't mean to speak for anyone. I know we voted against it for the time being, which delays it even more. During the discussion, I felt personally that what I was hearing both from the commission and then from, not the planning commission, sorry, the road commission, their responses, and then some of the discussion that we had, the way they were characterizing it wasn't in sync with what we, for instance, they said it's not designed to lower speeds, right? Move more traffic through. And we talked about the fact that the turnarounds, at least some of them would take traffic out of the city, and so it wouldn't necessarily help the local businesses. And then we have this ongoing parking problem. So I guess my only question is, rather than suppose that we are against it, or that planning commission is against it, do we want to consider that question as a, and then if we think, do we want it to still be a core part of their sort of assumptions when they make a master plan or not? And that's, I think that's what I wanted us to discuss as a group.
Yeah, I think it's a good discussion to have. I mean, I that night I voted against it again because it was quick, and I think that was one of the reasons. For me personally, I think the other big reason was optics, because we had just defeated Headley override, and we're talking about getting rid of things like the library and shipping services and so forth. And even though that money comes out of would have come out of a different fund, I don't think people would have fully understood that. And I think the question in people's mind would be like, okay, well, we're in such dire financial straits. Why are we spending $225,000 on a study that for something that may never even happen? So I think that was part of it as well. Along with the rush component. But I mean, personally, I still think it's a good idea. I think at least remembering from some of the past discussions years back, while they did say that they probably wouldn't be lowering the speed limit, but part of narrowing down roadways is to get the average speed down. So people will not be going 55. Maybe they'll be going, if the speed limit's, what is the speed limit, 45. Instead of going 55, maybe they'll go 50 because there's buildings are close, there's less space, there's less open space. So,
but I think one of the, if you look at how it's been implemented on Woodward and Telegraph and places, what it does is it gets rid of those intersections sort of cross traffic street, which is safe, it's safer, but it also means that you don't have to stop ever. If you want to stop, you just go into one of those turnarounds. And so the speed can be, as you can see on Woodward, for instance, I mean, the speed can be even greater than it is out here. But even just hearing some talk at your meetings, I guess maybe putting it the other way is, what are the advantages of even having it for the businesses and for the business district? That would be my question. And again, we don't have to decide now, except since we're doing this master plan and we've been doing it for 20 years with that subdivision, do we want to change that direction at all for that?
It sounds like at least Giffords Webster should have known our vote, maybe, and they can take and run with what our vote was and not necessarily give them a steer direction, but maybe at least they know that first go round we didn't approve the study.
Yeah. And it certainly affects timing. And again, if the master plan is for the rest of eternity, then you gotta leave almost everything open. But if you're just trying to say, what do we wanna do in the next 5 to 10 years, there's probably not, whether we want it or not, there's probably not gonna be a completed boulevard in Lathrup.
Where it started.
Right. And then, and also with the other thing that keeps coming to mind is all the parking issues that we're already gonna be discussing. I mean, parking just disappears under that plan.
Right, but there is a parking mitigation study that we did.
There is, which again, largely the things that were identified in that study have already been implemented. Now, they necessarily haven't been utilized, specifically like using some of that residential property adjacent to commercial property for parking purposes. We did propose that with but the next complex to the south, where they had some parking issues, and that one in particular is one of the parcels that was identified as losing the right-of-way parking. They obviously haven't acted on that, but we, in terms of laying the legal framework to be able to do that, we've made those and implemented those changes. Shared parking arrangements was another one that we implemented as a result of that study, and those, although limited, those have been utilized by some of the commercial properties to meet their.
Well, in the parking between Kebab Bob and Papa's Pizza too, the parking lot that we put in there, 28 spaces.
Yeah.
That was part of, wasn't that part of the mitigation study?
That happened before the mitigation study, but that concept
Helped,
is kind
right.
of where we were going with. I think we didn't close off, but next to Jagged Fork, we developed that right away into parking.
Right.
It was that maybe because we did that after.
Yeah.
But
Well, and I know it's not consistent, but there is a great deal of sidewalk that I think would be in that area if it were to get widened. I don't know if we would lose sidewalk or have to move sidewalk back. And there's sidewalk that's closer to the
Yeah, I
road than that.
I'm sure you're right. I'm sure there would be areas, but I don't remember if it was specifically included in that parking mitigation. I mean, their report, which again could have changed or likely to change in the future, which properties were identified as ones that would either be partial takings or complete takings. There were a couple, but not, overall, a majority of the commercial corridor would still be, viable in terms of having parking. That's what they were looking at.
Right.
The walkability thing, I don't know.
Right.
I would just be making a guess if I said they accounted for sidewalks, because I don't recall that being specifically included in that.
The other thing that I think is a positive that's happened that maybe mitigates some of the call for it was, I know the idea was sort of that by having a median, you make that street more crossable, right? But in practice, if you look again at Woodward, Telegraph, et cetera, that's not necessarily the case. And meanwhile, we have now, 4, 5, the 3 Hawk crossings plus the 3, so 6 places to cross that have lights within a mile and a half, which I'm not saying that was a major reason for it, but I feel like we've taken action to at least address, some of that issue.
I mean, I would just add to that, I think that one of the big opportunities you have with this is you're collecting input from your residents and finding out what their desires and wishes are. And this is a good opportunity to kind of use that contact with them to get their feedback on this road project. And if, a lot of the village center concept was created as a result of the discussions about the boulevard, and then that's what the residents had desired at that time was to pursue.
Yeah.
So kind of just touching base on what the residents do. Is it still consistent? Do they still want this vision of a village center, or is it something different? Is the delay in this road project coming to fruition has that kind of given them time to think about, do they still want this?
Right,
You know,
right.
and so, and that would be a big shift. That would be something that obviously, your master plan, if you switched away from this village center concept to something different, something, the discussion, there's been discussion around doing more type residential, mixed use type residential and maybe residential second floor, business first floor in the corridors. Is that the new focus? And if that is, then what planning steps would then have to be implemented as a result of that? Because the desire to have a village center, that was expressed and laid out in the master plan, but then subsequent to that, there were district guidelines that were created. There was a lot of work that the planning commission did. It kind of, again, to lay the groundwork so that if a developer does review the master plan, or when they do review the master plan, they say, oh, this is what they're envisioning. Where can I get more information on how that's gonna look?
Right.
What are the setbacks gonna be? What are the building heights? What are the material compositions going to be? So if that stuff is changed, then that would be, a good opportunity. This is a good opportunity to reference and reflect those changes, and then start, maybe planning for that type of a use in that district.
It does seem like a pivot point, because if you look at, the school project, that's an enormous change that wasn't anticipated, earlier. If you look at the plans potentially for this Maker's Mile or change, that's a big change. Like suddenly, and further housing besides just the school, but
There's
so-
some great opportunities on 12 Mile.
Right, well, I know, but I'm just saying, we're looking at the commercial corridors in a new way. It seems like, just as a matter of regular business. So maybe to your point, we need to look at the other assumptions that we were making, especially about the city center, where we found some real roadblocks, right? Like, that original plan sort of called for, or at least seemed to necessitate tearing down some houses, and I don't think that got any support once it was realized. So I guess maybe just to include this question in the overall rethinking, and I like what you said about getting public feedback on that, as long as it is presented in its current state. We're this far away from it. If we were to start, we're already, have decided not to pursue it this year. And then some of the things we learned from road commission, just to put it so that they're not voting on an idea of a median, but a reality of what a median would look like.
Yeah, and then also,
Not voting, you know what I mean?
in
weighing in.
the 15 years that, since we've really kind of taken
Yeah.
this direction, there's only been one completed new development within the village center, and that's the new Panera,
Yeah,
which is inconsistent with the parameters of what was
laid out.
anticipated for village center. It required a plan unit development agreement to
Right.
be able to get relief from those. So is that, it hasn't attracted the developments that were anticipated. The developers that have, Surnow Company, that have built and have expressed, projects in the district, those are different than what was anticipated and contemplated, the types of projects we would be getting interest in. So
Yeah.
again, that's an opportunity to, okay, is this what we really want? Is this, because, while master plans are reviewed every 5 years, the idea is that it's a long-term, long-range plan.
yeah.
That a developer, a prospective developer can look at and say, all right, this is the future, this is what they want to see. Does my business idea fit within their vision for their future? So, there's a lot of opportunities there, and I think you're right. We should, the increased engagement and trying to get more community input, because that ultimately is what is going to drive that document.
Yeah, and it's a fair question, because again, if the city is dead set against us at this point, it informs our zoning. And the zoning would have to change to support, going away from the village center idea.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Does there, I don't remember, I took it when it first came out, but does the survey ask about no, it does ask
It
about the
does,
boulevard.
and there's a
Yeah,
diagram
yeah.
of the current rendering.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so they will get some feedback from that now that the hard part is just getting people to take the survey and complete it.
Yeah.
That's the-
Well, transportation is tomorrow,
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
so at least we can surface it again. And this is, I mean, again, this is partially my fault, but like, to not have understood it, but I didn't think it was made all that clear either. How long a process this is and how early we still are in it, because some of the way it initially came across, it felt like we've gotten public feedback on housing now, because that happened last time, and that's the end of that. And I was like, well, that didn't happen, you know, I mean, people didn't show up, et cetera, et cetera. So the fact that the process is longer gives us a chance to surface some of these things and maybe talk about them. So I felt good about those parts of the answer. And again, it wasn't really an attack, but I do wish, I'm glad that we're gonna have an opportunity for a little bit of dialogue tomorrow, because it's hard to like have a paper conversation, you know.
Yeah, and to go back to your first point about, you know, do we need more council interactions? You know, the one thing that's a little weird, not weird, but awkward, I guess is the word, is just the fact that we don't run the, you know, the master plan process. It's the
Yeah.
planning commission who's responsible for it. But we can provide input. So maybe the answer to that is we have a, you know, like what we did for the meeting tomorrow, where we'll have a section where council can provide comments. Maybe we just do that, you know, one or two more times between now and, you know, in the end of the process.
There's gonna be a point where they stop collecting data and they start making a draft. And I thought maybe that would be a place for us to have conversation again, where they can present some of what they saw surfacing, you know, and I felt like I was seeing what they had said they were surfacing at some of the meetings, and I'm like, I don't know what that is, but now that I understand their process a little better, I think there is that moment, you know, maybe midsummer or so, where we could either have a planning commission opportunity.
Maybe a joint meeting.
A joint meeting,
Yeah.
something like that would be great.
Yeah, maybe we can do that when they get closer.
Yeah, especially after the town hall where more feedback takes place.
Yeah.
What, have they tentatively scheduled a town hall? I can't remember.
Not yet. I think we're waiting for these last couple meetings and surveys to close. I think earliest would be June.
Yeah,
Okay.
right now it's being forecasted.
So in that context, in Giffords Webster's response to this question about the Southfield Boulevard project,
Yeah.
it says, basically, it says that the city council can provide planning commission on direction on if we want to continue to include this plan for Southfield Boulevard in our master planning process or not. And then it says, if that is something that city council intends to do, perhaps there should be an initial conversation at a high level between the city administrator and our COC transportation planners to understand the best approach. So my question is, when would we get to that point where that would make sense to have Mike have a conversation with our COC about that? Does that happen after this town hall in June? Before that town hall in June?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wasn't anticipating that response, because in my mind, we have had a conversation with our COC, because they came and told us.
We had a
what the next
conversation
step
about
was.
investment in a
Right,
planning process.
right.
That is
Not about the
different-
design
That's
or-
different than the impact that whatever they're gonna plan
Yeah.
would have on our master plan. Those are two related, but not exactly the same things. They were trying to convince us to invest in
Right,
the
yeah,
plan.
no, I know. Well, what is the process? I mean, I guess,
Yeah.
to your point, yeah, sure, it makes more sense to do it after, say, the town hall.
Yeah, from one perspective, I agree that would make
Yeah,
the most sense, because then
yeah.
you have more information. On the other hand, if we
Yeah.
wait too long, our COC may be farther enough down the path that it's more difficult to make any adjustments based on whatever feedback. And they may not make any
I'd
adjustments
say
anyway, right?
Based off the road commission schedule right now, they have their marching orders. They're working with Southfield. They're going from Mount Vernon to Lincoln. That's gonna be their focus for the next couple of years.
But that will affect us. And
Down the road.
down the road, but
whenever
I
they
think,
finish it, yeah, but.
I think it's something you could wait till probably after June to get all the feedback, and then,
Okay.
then at that point, council can kind of make a decision, be like, hey, we want out of this project, and we're gonna take it out of our master plan, or hey, we still like the idea, let's keep including it. We don't know what it's gonna look like in 5 years, but we still like the idea.
Okay.
And that's the point of parts of the master plan. We like the idea, even though it might never happen.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the village center. Yeah.
But if, and then conversely though, and this is what I was just getting a sense of, and it could be completely wrong, But if we don't like that idea, then do we need to signal it? That's what I was trying to get at. And I mean, your guys need to weigh in too, right? The businesses, whether I know at one point it seemed like, I think they were behind it, but it's been a long time, so.
Yeah, right now there's not enough data, and it's something that we'll engage with them on, and
Yeah.
even through the recast city process, we'll be
Right.
engaging with the property owners and the business districts, so we'll also get their feedback.
Yeah. Okay.
Anything else for now? Okay, let's move on to item B, council rules, orders, and procedure.
That's just another.
So you're basically saying we could have canceled this meeting if I wasn't so loud. Let me just be really, it's a little awkward, but I'm just gonna go ahead with it. I think the goal of the rule is to get rid of disruption and any feeling that people are being having their space invaded, et cetera, right? And that was the genesis of this, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I do think that in practice, sometimes the enforcement's causing more disruption or the looking for the rule breaking. And I get, we use somebody else's rule and it seemed like fairly rational. I think it's rational, but I would suggest that we could write a rule that really looked at what we want to stop. So just for instance, and I wrote a few things down, sorry. Sorry, I have to get to it. Here we go. So, we know they have the right to record, Michigan Open Meetings Act, so we just, say that we know that that's the fact. On equipment and safety, I don't think we should, I know we required tripods, and I think I know the reason for that was so that people weren't, sticking it in their faces, et cetera. But there doesn't really need to be a tripod in order to stop that from happening. My thought would be, make sure that nobody obstructs views or aisles or access, right? So you're making a rule that says you can't be obstructive, that you can't block people's views, etc. If you do have a tripod, you would have to be in a special place so that you didn't cause that. But if you just had your phone, as long as you weren't in anybody's personal space and you weren't blocking anyone's view, like this. So again, like just sort of making a rule that blocks the bad outcome, but without overreaching. Because a few times I feel like, okay, the only way we knew somebody was recording wasn't because they were causing a disruption or blocking someone's view, but just because we noticed it, and then we had to enforce it because that makes sense. You want to be fair. So I was thinking, I didn't get this to anyone at time, so it's not fair to say it today, but I was going to suggest just some slight changes and put it out to everybody to look at maybe before next one. But you see what I'm trying to get at? I just don't want us to have to be like guarding the world. What we want is if somebody's disruptive, that we have the power to stop them.
May I interject here?
Yeah, of
So,
course.
it's not just us that find the interruption. It's where people are texting us, sitting in the audience. And just to be very transparent with you, you have not gone through the things that we have gone through regarding these, why we had to incorporate this. And so I agree that it doesn't have to necessarily be on a tripod, but what happens is if you give someone just a little bit, they take extra. And what was happening, we also have a responsibility of keeping all of our residents, no matter who they are, to feel safe. And there's numerous residents that have come to our meetings and have not felt safe. They felt bullied, they felt threatened, they felt harassed by recordings being thrust in their face. So hence the reason back to the tripod and not having it moved. And so we talked about it, and I looked it up. It is both Riverview and Milan, I think it's Milan, that have to be in a designated area and to be set up, but before the meeting. And that's also about the not for people to feel harassed, which again, just reiterating, there's numerous people that have complained about being harassed. Also being demonized by something they may have said while on being recorded that's used in a place that everyone does not have access to, but yet still being painted as being bad or being,
Well,
it's
that-
used against
yeah.
them, basically.
You're bringing up a lot of things at once, and that's fine. I think the right to record is the right to record.
Absolutely.
So that, if you come late, you still bring your rights with you. Now, if you come late and set up a tripod and make a big deal out of being there late, that can be disruptive, I agree. But if you come late and you have your phone and you're holding it like this, that's not disruptive, it's not in anybody else's space, etc. I would suggest something where the chair or whoever, the governing officer, has absolute right to say that's disruptive or that's in somebody's space, etc. And I think that's perfectly fair, but to enforce ahead of anybody, disruption, ahead of obstruction, I think is stepping over the line, and I don't know that, honestly, if it was challenged, it could be enforced. That's my concern.
And I think that it's also a great point that if someone feels like it should be challenged, they always have the opportunity to go to the
Well,
courts for it.
we can, I'm just suggesting that first of all, I've seen the disruptive meetings. I understand the genesis of this rule. I said that from the beginning. But I've also, even while I've been on council, seen that sometimes the enforcement of the rule to the letter has caused more disruption than the actual action. So if we could make the rule focused more on the outcomes we don't want versus trying to anticipate what might cause those within reason. Like the requirement of a tripod is if you're not in somebody else's space, then I don't understand the basis for causing, if you're holding your phone like this and pointing it at the council and or the podium.
Well, that's where the problem comes in at.
Right,
But
that's
they have
essentially what
every
we
right,
had before.
Yeah.
but they can point it at the podium. It's part of the Open Meetings Act. They can record the meeting.
The open meetings.
Turning
Act-
around and putting somebody, on that, I agree, that we should be able to stop that. Also, by requiring them to not touch their equipment and set up early, we're saying they have to record the whole meeting. And I don't think you can actually forcing people to record all of it if all they want is a certain part or a certain topic. And it doesn't do us any good. I just want it to be smooth for everybody. I want to be able to protect that right, I want to be able to protect the audience, but I want us to be focused on more important things. And I think we can get there with a slightly different thing, so that we don't feel the onus to say, uh-oh, look over there, and we can respond to real issues.
My concern is about encouraging more people who live or work or own businesses in the city to feel comfortable participating in our governing processes. And there's been a huge drop-off in that exercise of that right, in my experience, not just my opinion, based on what I've seen in the last 4 years. I wasn't on the council when this rule was passed, so I didn't have a vote in the process, but I definitely have spoken to people before I was on council and after being on council about feeling intimidated, unwelcomed, not comfortable being present in council meetings.
I think part of the issue is, and forgive me if
Because
I'm
of the
wrong.
video recording.
Yeah, no, I understand. I'm aware of it. I think some of the issue, though, was that initially, being recorded at a meeting, people were not comfortable with it and they weren't used to it. And there was a feeling that they shouldn't have to be recorded, right? And I can, listen.
Yeah.
No,
No,
that's
I
not
don't-
it at
I
all.
don't- I
That's
disagree.
not it.
I don't mean you guys.
No,
Yeah.
no, I'm
No, no.
saying the residents. I'm saying that I think that besides, and this, I'm gonna go out on a line, a major line, that step outside of who's videoing and ask other people who have been victims of the videoing. because it's not that they don't want to be on camera. Everybody knows there's always a camera right over our shoulder. You're being videoed at all times being in this building. We're videoing now. It wasn't that we didn't want to be videoed. It was the fact of being able just to kind of have just open dialogue.
Yeah, no, I remember. Yeah.
So, and then it is a known fact once you go into the meeting that you're going to be videoed. Had nothing to do about them not wanting to be on camera. Had everything to do with being threatened, harassed, or bullied.
I mean, I think
Or
we got to use
clickbaited.
the words, those words with, yeah, threatening is a word that I don't know that I would put to anything that.
But have you had any experience of the people that did feel threatened? Did you get, I mean, I would suggest for you to.
Okay, people can feel threatened, it doesn't mean they were being threatened, right?
What's,
But I mean, there are examples
Yeah,
of
I mean, if
video.
I could jump, sorry. just-
All right.
I mean, and that's why we did specifically include the language that individuals should not utilize a recording device to intentionally frighten, intimidate, threaten, harass, or annoy any other
Yeah.
person, or to disrupt an open meeting.
Correct.
There were residents that did express that they, and what Kelly's saying is, that's their, they perceived the use of that device as a threat. They felt intimidated by that.
Right.
And nobody coming to a public meeting
Should feel that way.
should have to
100%.
experience that.
I understand that.
So these are not, these are, you're right, I mean, absolutely, everybody, it's in the Open Meeting Act, you have an absolute right to record an open meeting, a public meeting. The public body also has an absolute right to implement reasonable regulations to minimize the
Right.
disruptions to that meeting, which, and again, at your request last meeting, I did go back and I pulled out the information that I had collected when I drafted these. It was Kelly's right, it was Mylan, there's an MML fact sheet, that's pretty much where I got the specific language from. They cited excerpts from Mylan Council rules. There are several other communities that have similar types of restrictions. There is no direct Attorney General opinions or litigation on that challenge the reasonableness of the restrictions. So that I can't give any sort of guidance as to how a court would interpret these if they were considered to be overly restrictive. That being said, this body is free to amend these rules as they feel fit and appropriate. So I don't think it's a bad thing if you did want to share some potential revisions for us to take a look at those, and maybe they will still achieve the goals of protecting, really, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to encourage public engagement and encourage people to feel comfortable coming to these meetings, while still balancing the public's right to record those meetings and use those recordings as they deem appropriate.
Yeah.
I tend to agree with you. I mean, the requirement that it be on a tripod probably goes back to a point in time where cameras had to be held on a shoulder or something, and cell phones weren't anticipated to be used as a recording device. So could we amend these rules to allow an individual to record on their cell phone so long as it's not, being used to put it in somebody else's face, so it's not causing a disruption? I think that's feasible. Could these rules be amended to allow someone to only record a portion of the meeting? If they could do that without creating a disturbance, then I think that, again, that would be reasonable. I think the things, in here about not, their equipment doesn't, can't rely on, we don't have microphones, but some other larger communities utilize station microphones for various speaking points, and some people would try to tie their equipment into that so they could get better audio. We don't allow that. Obviously, that would create a disruption if someone's trying to plug in and out. Jim would have a fit
Right.
if we were doing that in the other room. So do I think it's something that we can, absolutely, we can reconsider these rules, but it's ultimately it would be majority of this body making that decision.
What would be the language around, so if you say take it off the tripod, and then you say, well, I agree with you, I don't want them to turn around. So if someone turns around, now do we have to speak up, or like what's your, I'm curious of what's your like thought process around that. So if you remove it and you say don't turn around, and someone turns around, don't you consider that a distraction as well? Like, just what would be the language around that?
Well, I mean, specifically, like I said, you know, if we're looking at section 25 of the rules of procedure, which address the video recordings, you know, my recommendation would be to leave subsections B and C in there. Those specifically address using the recording device to intimidate or threaten or harass someone, putting it into someone else's personal space without their consent. Again, I would, you know, with respect to subparagraph A, there's really 4 rules in there that's kind of what we're talking about. The first one being that recording devices must be on a tripod or set in one location and remain there. Some communities like Southfield require anyone that videotaping, they have to be at the back of the room. Like they can't, you know, in there again, I think the intent behind that when that was drafted was, you know, if you have news crews
Right.
or television or radio or whatever, and they have larger, more disruptive equipment, that they want that out of, you know, someone shouldn't have to be looking over a cameraman if they're trying to pay attention to a meeting. You know, I think though there's opportunities within this area where you could, you know, maybe narrow some of these requirements. So, you know, larger recording devices that are not a personal device would be required to be on a tripod in a designated area. You know, I think leaving you don't want people with flash photography or add additional lighting or setting up remote mics in the room. I think I would leave those restrictions in place. I think those are reasonable, and again, I think they would be enforceable. But if this is something that you guys wanted to revisit and revise, you know, I'm happy to consider and you know, John, you mentioned you have some ideas on how this could be rewritten. I'm happy to take a look at that. If anybody else has ideas on how it would potentially be rewritten, I think it's certainly an area that you can discuss. You know, as it's written now, I'm confident that all of these restrictions are reasonable. I don't think any of these restrictions, you know, they might be a slight inconvenience to a person, but I don't believe they preclude anyone from exercising their right to record a public meeting. But again, these are not they're not set in stone. These are things that can be modified, eliminated. I wouldn't recommend going much more stringent, but I think you could probably provide some flexibility for, you know, the handheld recording devices like you mentioned, like cell phones.
Yeah, I would make the argument that going off the tripod is going to make it worse than being on the tripod, because now how do we enforce that, right? Because I mean, I think to all the issues that we had before. You know, all of a sudden there's a disruption in the audience because, you know, somebody's going like this and sticking in somebody else's face, and so now we've got to sit there and, you know, how do we enforce that? Because we don't see it, we may not see it. Whereas if it's on a tripod, you know, all the cameras are in one spot. We can see if somebody's using it, you know, weaponistically, if that's a word. But you know, if we go back to hand holding again, that's what we had before. I mean, for all intents and purposes, this was. People could do whatever they want with their phone, and it's just a matter of whether or not they got caught or whether or not they were making other people feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, we really didn't. I mean, we didn't have any guidelines with respect to
Right.
filming, so it was to some extent whatever anybody wanted to do. And again, you know, there is a volume of court cases where if a body does not have a written policy, then trying to enforce that is, you know, you can't do that. I mean, largely that body of litigation surrounds the public's right to address the body. You know, the most reasonable, and almost every community has written policies now, but some did not, where they designate a specific time during the meeting where people can address. If you didn't have a written policy with respect to that, the body would be treading into dangerous areas if they were just striking down public, attempting to make comments. But we don't have that issue. We haven't, you know, the original policies that were amended were from the late '80s, and you know, that language was in there at that time. So, like I said, there's a lot of litigation on those specific topics. Nothing that I could find directly with respect to the videoing policy, but the few references the courts have basically analogized it to the right of the public's right to address the public body. So, again, upholding that they can impose these reasonable restrictions without any guidance on what is or is not reasonable, but, like I said, I'm confident that, you know, based on just what the research that I did in drafting these, other communities that have identical and others that have similar language, that as it's currently written, they would be enforceable, but again, nothing saying that we can't revisit that or reconsider some revisions to it.
Yeah, what I would suggest is John, if you've got some proposed revisions, why don't you get them to Mike,
Yeah.
and then we
To
can
be
discuss them
shared,
at the next
and we
study
discuss
session.
with the next thing. I'll just say, I'm in full agreement with the goals of the rules. I don't think, I don't want disruption, I don't want disruption out there, obstruction, et cetera. But I do think that maybe we could, my own personal opinion is maybe we are keeping people from being able to do what they're supposed to be able to do. And that's where I'll leave it for today, but I will suggest a few things that you guys can look at ahead of time. And I just didn't have a chance to do that for this. I appreciate everybody putting this on the agenda. I know it's a little fraught, but here we are.
I would just ask that when you're thinking about these suggestions,
Yeah.
also think about them through the lens of how do we encourage more participation? How do we provide more freedom of how people record the meetings
Mhm.
without diminishing some people's willingness to actually participate?
I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you on a practical point of view, but I'm saying that a right is a right, so you gotta make sure that that right is being protected. If that right's being protected with the rules we have, then we're good, that's all. And yeah, I want more people to come. Another argument, and then I'll leave it, but since you brought it up, is if you're seeing the meetings televised, then you might participate. I mean, if you have an opportunity to see them there, then you might start participating, because you know what's happening at them or something, I don't know, I'm just saying. We want to be transparent, we want to be seen as much as possible. That could be 800 people sitting here, or it could be people watching on YouTube or other channels. So. But I agree again with you on the goal. So, and I'll keep it all. And you can all not like any of it. That's fine too. I appreciate, like I said, you putting it on the agenda today, and that's all I have for today.
Anything else? All right, next on the agenda, city administrator evaluation.
So this is always fun to talk about, getting myself evaluated. Like I noted, you guys are really good at providing feedback throughout the year, but part of my contract, naturally, evaluations are required for certain bonuses or for potentially salary increases. So this kind of discussion is about starting that process. I included the template we used last year. I know council talked about wanting to update that, so this is if you want to do that, this is a chance for y'all to do that. I did include just a note, naturally, evaluation packet from ICMA, International City County Managers Association, just kind of maybe give you guys some thoughts, and included at the very end of the packet was just a very just general draft template that they included with their packet as well. So,
But that's not the one that's currently
there's
being
one.
used?
There's the first one before the ICMA guide is what council used last year and in the past. The one at the very end is just a template from ICMA, but this is the time to revamp it if you want any form, and then we kind of go from there.
I think that we've been trying to revamp it for many years, and so I appreciate you putting this in there so we can update it, because I know we updated it, but I just think that the whole thing needs to be revamped. It should even be in a fillable PDF so it doesn't look crazy the way that they have here in the past.
I appreciate from the ICMA example, the scoring criteria, because we didn't really have any good scoring metric in the one we had last year. So for sure, we should incorporate that into whatever we come up with. So it sounds like, yeah, we need to I think we all agree that there are updates required to the evaluation form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think in any role, especially as the CEO, the scoring makes everything just more truthful, more honest. So I like the ICMA version. I also was curious of what you guys thought about Mike actually kind of taking each one of these topics and putting the summary of like what he completed this year, and us being able to have that discussion to also get his point of view of what, you know, he feels like he completed throughout the year.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we've done this in the past, the manager does this, to kick off the process, the city manager does a self-evaluation.
Yeah.
And then we get that.
Just,
and
but I'm saying,
You're saying something different?
If he's following like the new process.
I get it. He talked to me about this earlier, and it was one of those things where, hey, we're game for doing a self-evaluation. It's just, what do you want the self-evaluation to focus on? To me, having it super broad doesn't help me doing that. So that's where he's trying to go with that.
Right.
But
So
we're saying if we adopt this template, that he would also adopt it for his self-eval.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that makes,
Yeah, whatever evaluation form I think he
Yeah.
uses, with the same one that he would be using for the self-evaluation.
Yes,
Right.
I would,
Yeah.
and I would suggest, like, we're not gonna take the ICMA template as is.
Yeah.
There are components of it that make sense. We're gonna have to craft the questions and the sub-items in a way that matches up with the priorities of this council. But for sure, like, providing you with some direction on what we would like Jalen just brought up a great example of a summary of things that you've accomplished in each category would be super helpful, absolutely.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure whatever we come up with, to me, the goal of an evaluation isn't necessarily to come up with a score specifically. It's to provide feedback, so I want to make sure that there's space for narrative. There were things I liked and didn't like about the old one. I mean, as I've been completing it in the years past, it felt like it was really repetitive. So definitely want to get rid of some of the repetitive nature of it.
I haven't been through it with you guys before. One of the things I know, and some companies will separate these two things, some people put them together, is out of the feedback of the past year, you derive goals or, recommendations for the coming year. Is that all one process here? How does that part work? Or is it two?
Did we ever establish goal? I don't think we established goals. I think we just did the evaluation.
Well, I think you initially had performance goals for.
Right, well, the performance goals, right, but,
And that was part of the evaluation process, was kind of making sure that those, because some of your goals were, you had to stay here for a year.
Right.
So he's obviously
Accomplished that. Good
accomplished
job.
that
Move
one.
that.
Right,
Now
but we
we
didn't have-
got to keep him here for 10 years. That's the next step. So, but no, I think you
Mike,
have.
you're not smiling.
Yeah.
Josh,
We only do that to the chief, nobody else.
So yeah, you have incorporated those.
yeah. So if I can just make a suggestion, so, Mr. Mayor, I'd say if you want to work on like a template, kind of merging all this together, bring it back to council for the next study session, and potentially council adopt it. And we'll do
Or-
the timeline of a month since their next meeting.
All
And
right.
then
I was wondering, do you want to make it the study session project, or?
yeah, I mean, it seems to me like rather than me come up with a template, we should all come up with a template
Yeah,
together.
It could just be the one topic one.
Yeah, so we can just do that for like the next study session.
We can provide feedback or input to you before the meeting
And
via
everybody works
email,
on their
right?
part.
Yeah.
Works on
Yeah.
their own and come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this template's nice it's a nice, I'm pointing at the wrong one, but
Yeah, I
right,
see, I'm
gives
nice.
us something to work from.
Oh, yeah.
I like that. But I do like that idea that, if it's positive, great, but like that it helps generate some ideas about how to go forward, as
I agree
far
with that
as the
too.
scores.
Having some direction on goals and objectives that the council would like the city administrator to include in what your plan is for the coming year will be more helpful than just using it only retrospective.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
would that meeting need to be its own separate meeting as well? Because it almost sounds like strategic planning.
I think that yes, and only because I think, this is just my opinion, provide the feedback on the performance evaluation, and that feedback will bleed into some ideas for goals, but then you're gonna need at least a little bit of time to ingest that feedback and the potential goals in order to articulate, here's the goals that we really want you to focus on, and have a dialogue with the city administrator about that, right?
So then-
Because that might need to be adjusted based on other things that
It sounds
he or
like
she's planning to
a
do.
subject for the
Yeah.
meeting about
Yeah,
the
we can,
subject.
if we want to pick this up, we'll have to pick it up at the regular meeting. I want to open up real quickly to public comment. And we've got, how much do we have, 5 minutes?
I'll make it quick, Rick Wiz, just a couple quick things. One, I think, from what I've seen of the plans for Boulevard, it would make this end of Lathrup Village less walkable. I mean, it's a challenge to get across Lathrup or Southfield right now, even with the lights. And I think if we added any more lanes, it would make it even a bigger challenge. The parking, I think if you notice on weekends, the buildings closer to Olga's on this side of Southfield, those parking lots get packed. I don't know what are in those buildings, what businesses there are, but they get packed with cars. And it might be over the weekend, sometimes it's evenings. So if those get lost, I don't know where those cars are gonna go. If those businesses are gonna stay, I'm not sure what's gonna happen with that. I don't know if this is too late to, I noticed something about getting rid of C-click fix. And I don't know if this is a done deal, but I think the idea of getting rid of that is a bad idea. I mean, because this gives people an anonymous way to report things. It's something they can access 24 hours a day. They can provide pictures. The idea of having to come into City Hall to report something, well, it's not that big a deal, I'm not gonna bother with it. Okay, so that's something else. And it also gives people an opportunity to be updated on the progress of their issue. One last thing about evaluations. Several of the places I worked at, we did what was called a 360-degree evaluation. So people were evaluated or got input from their bosses, their supervisors, other people they worked with, either patients. When I was a PT, I got from other PTs, got input, gave me input. Nurses up on the floor gave input. You know, how was I, doing stuff outside the department, but it's still part of my job, as well as then supervisors were always getting input from patients. So I think coworkers and whatever is a great way to involve the whole system. That's it.
That's right.
Lauren Ferris, Golden Gate. I wanted to talk about the change of the rules of recording and Councilman Susanus. I hope that you will review with the other council people the problems that we have had in the past, and that they have mostly not happened since you've been on council, sir. And I was the victim of some of that harassment and had that camera turned around over and over again in my face, over and over again, until I complained about it and until I actually flipped the recorder off and asked them over and over again to stop it. And then that segment of that tape has been used and weaponized on private Facebook pages. That's not, I want to know if someone's freedom to record is greater than my freedom to be here and to feel, like as soon as you start talking about, my hands started shaking. It's been a real problem. I've written letters to, this lady over here too, harassing me, whispering already and shaking her head the whole time. I still come to the meetings. I come to almost all the meetings. I still do as much as I can for Lathrup Village. I don't see those people doing anything for the city, and have to deal with that harassment. That change of the rule did make it safer for me to come, though I still deal with some harassment. And I know that my friends and a specific neighbor will not come because of it. So I just wanted you to consider that, and Mr. Susanus, personally, I would like you to find out why. Thank you.
Thank you.
So wow, I was not aware that there was some talk about eliminating C-click fix. I'm assuming this is a budget consideration. If it is, there are competitors. I'm familiar with another similar platform called Get It Done, which is also an excellent, I've used it, it's an excellent platform. There probably are others, so at least there might be an opportunity for getting multiple quotes, from multiple similar services. The other thing, I'll be participating in upcoming meetings, but I'm very much a proponent of the Boulevard proposal. I was very disappointed that the city just completely noped out of the study, and with assurances that Southfield would not pursue it if we, couldn't, if we didn't. And Southfield went ahead and approved their participation in that study. So I realize there's a budgetary constraint, but let's not close our minds to it. The village center is not a thing. I've done some looking into, some of the, looking into, well, what were these parking zones that we created years ago? Did we actually create them? There's some funny stuff with our map that needs to get resolved. The houses on California Drive that are part of city center. Does that imply that you can do commercial businesses in there, for example? Does that affect the property values going forward, one way or the other? But that's a process that's going to, roll out over the next months, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Bob Barretts. I appreciate the decorum of the council. I don't feel like I need to hold as dear to that. It's your wife who does this. And it's your wife who has been asked not to harass people, and she ignored that. She continually ignored that. And I am a victim of your wife too. My image is online. She said things about me and Lauren that are just ridiculous. So she couldn't rein herself back out of decency. So they had to write rules to keep her in line. And then even after they wrote the rules, I watched her every meeting she brought her phone break the rules. Now she wasn't harassing people in the crowd anymore, but she was still breaking the rules. What makes you think that if we take relax some of these rules, that she's going to adhere to the rules then?
Thank you.
Laurie Coons. I would like to speak regarding how long we took on discussing videotaping, because these wouldn't have to even be a discussion if you didn't stop recording the study sessions. And now being recorded, it's not even live, so it's not the same thing because it can be edited. The city residents have a right to know what's going on in these meetings. And when you deny our right, we like to have a voice and get it recorded. And the things you're discussing about harassment, I have very much been harassed by two people, the Bearses, that just spoke. I also have been harassed by the Mayor Pro Tem, Kelly Garrett. I also have proof, recordings, police reports to prove these. I would like Kelly Garrett to prove the harassment she's saying she had, and especially back when those photos were out, she announced that they were racist. They were in no way racist, and I can prove that as well. So it's not fair what's spoken at council is the word, because I have proof that it's otherwise.
Anyone else?
And I have asked that Kelly Garrett stop harassing me, and she happened to do it outside of the city. And very unacceptable, because she carried it on illegally. Thank you.
All right, we're running over. If there's no one else, we're running over, so we will adjourn this and reconvene in a couple minutes.